For 3 weeks, she kept a secret that would destroy her family. A lottery ticket worth over $200 million sat on her refrigerator, while she called her son and daughter asking for money. Not because she needed it, but because she needed to know something far more important. And when her grandson offered his entire savings of $500 to help, while her own children refused, she made a decision that would cost them everything. Welcome to the She Defied Age channel. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments section which region you are connecting from. We genuinely value this information. We wish you a deeply engaging experience with this remarkable narrative that is about to unfold. Listen here before you scroll past this moment. Hit that subscribe button and tell me what corner of the world you're calling home right now. You're probably sitting there wondering how a woman in her late 60s from a modest town in the American heartland ended up holding more cash than most people see in 100 lifetimes, using that abundance to orchestrate one of the most devastating family reckonings imaginable. But that's exactly the story I'm about to share with you, and it all traces back to something that happened 21 days ago. My name is Margaret Foster, and I've been playing the same lottery combination for 17 years. The digits represent moments that shaped my life. My husband Robert's date of birth, the anniversary of our marriage, and the birthday of my grandson Michael. Some might call it foolish nostalgia. My neighbor Patricia would laugh every time I'd make my weekly trip to the convenience store with my dollars in hand. Margaret, the statistical likelihood of winning is lower than surviving a lightning strike while simultaneously being attacked by a wild animal. She'd announce this like she was sharing some profound wisdom. That was her routine, same as mine. Then came that morning 3 weeks back. The kind of Tuesday morning that feels like any other, unremarkable in every way. I was seated at my kitchen table with my usual beverage, watching the morning broadcast when the announcer began reading out the winning numbers for the massive drawing. I wasn't paying full attention, to be honest, just having it on as background noise. Then I heard something that made my spine straighten. The first number mentioned was 17. Followed by 28, then 35. My hands began to tremble, not from fear but from a dawning realization. I stood up and retrieved the ticket I'd placed beneath a magnet on my refrigerator door some days prior. As I reviewed each number, my heartbeat grew louder in my ears. Every single one aligned. All 6 matched. The amount being discussed was $325 million before governmental deductions. After the government took their substantial portion, I'd still be looking at a figure exceeding $190 million. A sum so vast it felt disconnected from reality. My first instinct was to dial my son Christopher, then my daughter Victoria, and finally my grandson Michael. At 20 years old he was practically grown, but I wanted the 3 people closest to my heart to hear this incredible news directly from me. But something inside me hesitated, held me back from making those calls immediately. Perhaps it was a memory of Victoria's comments during the previous holiday season about how wonderful it would be to eventually inherit something substantial when I was no longer around. Or maybe it was Christopher's repeated suggestions that I ought to sell my house since a single woman didn't need all that space. Or perhaps it was something deeper, an instinct that had been honed over decades of life experience. I chose to keep silent. For 3 full weeks, I didn't reveal a word to anyone. Instead, I arranged meetings with legal professionals and wealth management consultants. I constructed an intricate plan. I put systems in place. And then I made a choice that would change everything. My reasoning was straightforward. If my adult children genuinely loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide, they would demonstrate compassion when I presented myself as someone in need, someone without means to help themselves. The test I devised was elegantly simple. I would contact each of them independently and explain that I was struggling financially and needed assistance, covering the cost of my cardiovascular medications. This wasn't completely fabricated, as my heart prescriptions are genuinely expensive. But with my newly acquired wealth, affordability had ceased to be an issue. What concerned me was the state of the emotional bonds I'd built with my children over a lifetime. I dialed Victoria first, my daughter. When she answered the phone, I could hear activity in the background, suggesting she was in the middle of something. "Mom, I'm at the salon getting my nails done, what's up?" Her voice had that impatient quality I'd come to recognize over recent years. I explained my situation as calmly as I could manage. "I'm experiencing some financial pressure, And I was hoping you might be able to help me cover my medication expenses. There was silence on her end, stretching out uncomfortably. Mom, figure it out yourself. Not my responsibility, she responded, and I heard the distinctive sound of a call being terminated. I stared at my phone for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter, the child I'd carried, the baby I'd nurtured through illness and injury, through disappointments and celebrations, had just disconnected from me without hesitation when I presented myself as vulnerable. Christopher's response was marginally less brutal, but somehow more cutting in its condescension. When I called him at his office, I could hear the background noise of a busy workplace. He answered the phone with corporate professionalism. Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Make it quick. I outlined the same scenario about needing medication money. There was an intake of breath, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something resembling stern fatherly correction. Mother, we've discussed this before. You really need to learn how to budget your expenses appropriately. I can't keep rescuing you every time you hit a rough patch. You're becoming too dependent on assistance from others. Dependent. The word hung in the air between us. I, the woman who had worked dual shifts for years while raising 2 children alone after my husband passed, was being lectured about financial responsibility by a man I'd quietly paid tuition for while he was studying. Someone whose initial housing down payment had partially come from my savings. I maintained my composure and pressed further, hoping he'd reconsider. Christopher, I'm not asking for a large sum. Just enough to get through until my monthly Social Security payment arrives. This is the exact problem, he said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he'd perfected during his ascent through the corporate hierarchy. You need to make better decisions. I think it's high time we had a serious conversation about your future living arrangements. Have you looked into those senior residential communities we mentioned? They manage medications, prepare meals, handle everything for you. My heart sank. My children had apparently been discussing my future behind my back, planning my removal from my own home without my input. Christopher continued, unaware or uncaring of how deeply his words were cutting. And frankly, Mother, I need to be honest with you. I'm going to restrict your access to my phone line. Ashley and I were just discussing how we might be enabling your poor choices by always being available for you. Sometimes people need harsh lessons to learn reality. Sometimes they need to face natural consequences. The call ended abruptly. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the decades of memories contained within those walls, holding my breath and trying not to cry. My own son had chosen to sever communication, rather than offer a simple gesture of help. But Michael, my grandchild, represented a different kind of hope. Michael had always possessed a different character than his mother and uncle. He seemed to have inherited none of Victoria's self-centeredness despite being raised by her. Instead, he demonstrated genuine kindness, the kind that couldn't be taught or purchased. He called me simply to hear my voice, without expecting anything in return. He remembered important dates without needing digital reminders. When he visited, he approached me with warmth and physical affection. With trembling anticipation, I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring, and I could hear street noise in the background. Grandma Margaret, what's going on? His voice contained genuine warmth and pleasure at hearing from me. I explained my situation regarding medication expenses. There was a pause, and I felt my optimism beginning to crumble. Then he asked something that would prove to be the turning point. How much are we talking about, and more importantly, are you all right? I've got some money saved up, and I can make the drive down if you need me to check on you, or get you to a medical appointment. Grandma, what's happening? $500. That represented the totality of his emergency savings from his part-time work on campus. He was offering me every cent he had managed to accumulate, and he was prepared to travel several hundred miles just to ensure my well-being. The tears came then, streaming down my face as I realized what this young man's response meant. I thanked him and told him I couldn't possibly accept his money, but inside, my heart had made a decision. That Saturday, I purchased a vehicle for my grandson, brand new and pristine. When Victoria arrived at my home the following afternoon for what I assumed would be a routine visit, she immediately spotted the silver sedan parked near my residence. Michael was outside washing it, his face illuminated with joy. Victoria's expression cycled through confusion and suspicion before settling into something approaching anger. Her expensive blonde highlights didn't move in the breeze, held perfectly in place by whatever salon treatment she'd invested in that week. "Whose car is this, Mother?" she demanded, stepping out of her own luxury vehicle, one I knew she was struggling to maintain payments on. "That's mine. Grandma Margaret bought it for me," Michael called out, abandoning his cleaning supplies to give me an embrace. Victoria's face transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Inside, I noticed. "Now." Her voice was ice. Christopher pulled into my driveway almost immediately afterward, as if he'd been waiting for some signal. He took in the scene with the same emotional journey his sister experienced. Within minutes, both of my adult children were seated in my living room. Victoria perched on the edge of my sofa like contact with it might somehow contaminate her expensive clothing. Christopher wasted no time. "Where on earth did this money appear from, Mother? Last week you were calling us asking for financial assistance with medical prescriptions. Now there's somehow enough cash for a luxury automobile. Don't play games with us." I situated myself in my favorite chair, the one that Robert had purchased for me decades ago during our anniversary celebration. I kept my response simple and calm. "Well, I decided that a reliable vehicle for my beloved grandson was more important than my heart medication this month. Perhaps I should simply stop taking my prescriptions so I can continue showering my family with gifts." Ashley gasped audibly. "Mother, that's reckless. You absolutely cannot stop taking medication you need for your health." "Oh, now you're concerned about my well-being?" I responded, keeping my tone remarkably pleasant. "That's remarkably thoughtful of you, considering your previous response to my request for help with those exact medications." Michael appeared in the doorway, still wearing that radiant expression. His father turned to him immediately. "Michael, you need to decline this vehicle. Your grandmother clearly isn't making sound decisions. She stopped taking her medication to purchase a car for you. That demonstrates a troubling lack of judgment." "But Grandpa Christopher, I don't understand what you're saying." Michael looked genuinely confused. "Grandma Margaret and I had a wonderful conversation yesterday about my coursework and my goals. She's sharper than anyone in this room. She's certainly more mentally present than either of you." "Your grandmother called us requesting money," Victoria interjected. "Now suddenly she has enough cash for a vehicle worth thousands. Something doesn't align." Michael's face changed as he processed what he was hearing. His intelligence, evident in his scholarship to a prestigious university, and his focus on business studies, allowed him to make the connections quickly. "You called them asking for help?" he asked me quietly. I explained that I had indeed contacted both of them with the same story about needing medication funds. "And what was their response?" Michael pressed. His mother and uncle found the carpet beneath their feet suddenly fascinating, unwilling to make eye contact. "They said no, didn't they?" Michael's voice was soft, filled with a mixture of surprise and sadness. "My own mother and uncle refused to help you when you needed medicine to stay alive. When I offered to help, you bought me a car instead." "Michael, it's not quite so straightforward," Christopher started, but Michael held up his hand to silence him. "Grandmother, I'm starting to piece this together. This was some kind of test, wasn't it?" "A test." Victoria's voice reached that particular pitch that probably caused actual pain to nearby dogs. "You're standing there telling me you orchestrated an elaborate scheme to manipulate us?" I considered her expression, her perfectly maintained appearance, her designer accessories that cost more than most people earned in a month. "Scheme is such a harsh descriptor, Victoria. I prefer to think of it as revealing who you all truly are when presented with a simple choice between selfishness and basic human decency." Christopher began pacing, a habit he'd maintained since childhood whenever he felt uncomfortable. "This constitutes manipulation, Mother. Pure psychological manipulation." "Is it manipulation when I simply give people the opportunity to show their actual character?" I asked. I made a straightforward request. Michael immediately offered everything he possessed and wanted to drive several hundred miles to check on me. "You, Christopher," responded with lectures about my financial management and then disconnected our communication. Victoria told me it wasn't her concern and terminated our conversation. Those were your authentic choices, not fabrications on my part. Legitimate concerns, Christopher protested. Your financial circumstances have been precarious. You've made questionable financial decisions. Have I really, though? I stood and walked to my desk, withdrawing a substantial folder I'd prepared for this exact moment. Let me discuss what I consider poor financial decisions. Christopher, do you remember purchasing that motorcycle approximately 2 years ago, despite not having the financial capacity to afford it? Who do you suppose quietly settled your credit card debt so you could secure financing? Christopher's face turned ashen. Ashley turned her attention to her brother with sudden focus. And Victoria, after your marriage ended, and you were attempting to find yourself emotionally, who covered your housing expenses for 3 consecutive months while you recovered? I could see the moment recognition dawned on her face. I'm acquainted with all of it. Every financial bailout I provided that was never returned. Every favor I extended that went unacknowledged. Every instance where you accepted my help without hesitation, while simultaneously discussing what you anticipated inheriting after my death. I settled back into my chair, astonished at my own composure. Did you genuinely believe I would spend my remaining years functioning as a convenient financial resource for ungrateful children, while you plotted about your futures once I was gone? Michael was studying his mother and uncle with an expression suggesting he'd never truly seen them before. You two have been accepting money from my grandmother while telling me you couldn't help pay for my textbooks because money was limited. That's completely different, Victoria said without conviction. How is it different, Mother? Michael shook his head with visible disappointment. I'm a college student with part-time employment. I've been taught the value of working for what I want. You're adults with careers. That's not the same thing at all. We would have repaid you, Victoria said, tears beginning to stream down her face, though I suspected they were motivated more by her current circumstances than genuine remorse. With what financial resources? Both of you are barely managing your minimum debt payments. I closed the folder. So what happens now? Christopher asked, bitterness coloring his voice. You're cutting us off. You're choosing your grandson over your biological children. I'm selecting kindness over entitlement, he responded. Michael has never made demands of me. When I presented myself as needing assistance, he offered everything. You've both requested financial help repeatedly, but never reciprocated. The room fell quiet except for Victoria's occasional sniffles. Michael finally spoke up. Grandmother, I need to ask something. What exactly are we talking about in terms of resources? How financially secure are you? I smiled at this young man, recognizing that he'd proven himself trustworthy when his relatives had revealed their true selves. Michael, what would you think if I informed you that your grandmother won the lottery 3 weeks ago? He blinked, his mind clearly recalibrating. That would certainly explain the vehicle, he said slowly. Christopher snorted dismissively. Mother, let's be serious. We're probably discussing a modest sum. Maybe $10,000 or $15,000 at most. Try significantly higher, I suggested. Victoria's interest suddenly intensified. What do you mean by significantly higher? I walked back to my refrigerator and retrieved the ticket, the one I'd kept on display for 3 weeks like an ordinary piece of paper. Read the numbers for me, Michael, I said gently, extending the ticket. Michael took it, his eyes scanning the numbers. His complexion shifted to white. Grandmother, these are the winning numbers for the Mega Millions drawing from 3 weeks ago. That's correct. $325 million, I confirmed softly. Christopher lunged forward to grab the ticket, but Michael pulled it away protectively. Uncle Christopher, I don't think so. Not right now. Let me see that, Victoria demanded, but I raised my hand. The ticket has already been secured with my lawyers. The funds have been claimed, properly invested, and positioned in trusts with specific terms. The silence that followed was genuinely magnificent. Christopher's mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish suffocating on dry land. Victoria cycled from pale to red to pale again in rapid succession. 200 million, Christopher whispered eventually. Give or take several million in investment performance since the claim was filed. I allowed a smile of satisfaction to color my voice. The market responds favorably, when you suddenly have that magnitude of capital to deploy strategically. Victoria regained her voice first, but her words confirmed everything I'd suspected. Mother, we didn't realize when you initially called requesting assistance. If we'd known if you'd been wealthy when you asked, we would absolutely have helped you. I shook my head slowly at my daughter. Victoria, listen to your own words. You would have assisted your mother if you believed there was something you could gain from the transaction. That's not genuine love. That's transactional self-interest. I directed my attention to Christopher. Son, I have a straightforward question for you. If I were still living exclusively on my Social Security benefits and required medication assistance, would you help me? Christopher's pause provided all the answer I required. Exactly. I stood, suddenly experiencing the weight of accumulated years. I believe this conversation has reached its natural conclusion. Mom, wait, Victoria said desperately. We require discussion about this. We need to work out how we move forward as a unified family. We can find ways to resolve this. I raised an eyebrow. Victoria, approximately 20 minutes ago, you terminated your call to me when I expressed that I needed assistance. Christopher blocked my number. Now you want to engage in meaningful family conversation? Michael was still examining the lottery ticket like it might evaporate. Grandmother, I can't accept this vehicle. The magnitude feels excessive, especially given everything I'm learning. Michael, sweetheart, you offered me everything you possessed when you believed I needed assistance, I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. That automobile isn't something you should feel guilty about accepting. It's an expression of gratitude from someone who finally has the means to say thank you properly. Christopher had transitioned beyond shock into something resembling panic. Mother, I understand we handled this incorrectly, but you must acknowledge that we share biological ties. We can move forward together. Can we? I looked at him directly. In these 3 weeks since I acquired this money, how many times have you called just to check on me? How frequently has Victoria reached out? They exchanged glances. We've been occupied with our responsibilities, Victoria said weakly. But Michael called me twice this week alone just to have conversation. He wanted to tell me about his courses, ask about my garden, and see if I required anything. Michael's actions demonstrate genuine familial concern, while yours demonstrate concern only for what you might lose. I turned toward my grandson. And when I told you I needed assistance, what did you do? I offered to drive down immediately with everything I had saved, Michael said quietly. $500 from his meager savings. Meanwhile, the two of you, who I've supported financially for years, told me to handle it independently and suggested I move into assisted living. Derek ran his hands through his hair repeatedly. This was manipulation, Mother. Pure and simple. I had people followed. I hired professionals to investigate your financial circumstances during these 3 weeks. I discovered that you've been spending far beyond your means for years. The motorcycle payment, Ashley's regular spa visits, restaurant spending totaling thousands monthly, all funded through credit cards and occasional assistance from me that was never repaid. You had us investigated? Victoria went completely white. Christopher stepped backward. When you possess this magnitude of wealth, you want to ensure your assets are secure from people who might exploit your generosity. I pulled out a document. Over the previous 5 years, I've provided or loaned you both approximately $63,000. Not a single penny has been repaid. We intended to repay you, Victoria protested weakly. With what currency exactly? You're both barely covering your minimum debt obligations. I closed the folder. But that investigation revealed something particularly interesting. Your conversations about my estate. My death. The relief you believed it would bring. Michael was studying his mother and uncle like he was witnessing a complete stranger transformation. The investigator documented some particularly enlightening conversations where you both discussed how much simpler your lives would become if I experienced a significant cardiac event or stroke. I set down my phone carefully. The most disturbing discovery was that Christopher, you've been spreading information suggesting I'm experiencing cognitive decline. You've been laying groundwork to challenge my mental capability should I modify my will. And Victoria, you've been researching guardianship procedures not out of concern for my well-being, but because you discovered that if I'm declared incompetent, you could potentially assume control of my assets. Michael stood up slowly. I'm experienced in nausea. Don't worry, Michael. Your inheritance is entirely secure. I smiled at him. The concern should be directed toward your mother and uncle, who are about to discover exactly how expensive their greed has become. Derek found his voice. What kind of steps? Well, I've submitted myself to comprehensive evaluations by 3 independent physicians and a psychiatric professional. All have documented that I maintain complete mental competency. Those evaluations are filed with my legal representatives along with recorded video statements about my financial decision-making process. I was quite thorough in my preparation. Second, I've completely restructured my will. Michael is now my exclusive heir. Ashley made a sound resembling a wounded animal. Christopher's mouth opened and closed repeatedly. And third, I continued, enjoying their expressions of complete horror. I've decided to experience some enjoyment with my accumulated wealth. What exactly does that mean? Victoria asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected something devastating was coming. Your creditors received some quite fascinating telephone calls this morning. The color vanished from both their faces with remarkable speed. Mother, what did you do? Christopher asked desperately. I acquired all of your existing debts from your creditors, I said calmly. Christopher's motorcycle loan, Victoria's credit cards, both of your automobile payments, everything. Victoria grabbed Christopher's arm. Wait, that's actually positive, isn't it? Mother, thank you. That's incredibly generous. I didn't do that as an expression of generosity, I said, leaning back into my chair. I purchased your debt obligations, which means you now owe me instead of your various financial institutions. And unlike banks or credit card companies, I have particular perspectives about individuals who view their creditor as a burden. Victoria's voice became barely audible. How much do we owe you? I consulted my financial documents. Christopher, your complete debt obligation equals $114,000. Victoria, yours totals $135,000. Plus the $63,000 you borrowed from me over the years that remains unpaid. Your complete obligations are $177,000 and $128,000 respectively. Christopher sat down heavily. Nearly $180,000? That's impossible. And that's before implementing the new terms I've established as your creditor. 24% annual interest compounded on a monthly basis, no minimum monthly payments, complete balance due in 30 days or legal collection proceedings commence immediately. We don't possess that magnitude of resources, Victoria said, tears flowing. I'm aware. Christopher maintains approximately $1,200 in savings. Victoria, your account contains roughly $900. I'd conducted thorough research. Your alternatives are constrained. Christopher, you could sell your motorcycle, which might bring $12,000 to $16,000 depending on condition. Victoria, you could liquidate your current automobile and purchase something economical, potentially preserving $8,000 to $10,000. Both of you could acquire additional employment. That would maybe cover approximately 1/3 of what you owe me. There must be another option, Victoria pleaded desperately. Actually, there is, I smiled. You can request assistance from family. After all, families support one another, correct? That's precisely what you informed me I should depend upon. Mother, please, Christopher's voice fractured. We've made significant errors. We've treated you poorly. We can make this right. Can you? Because I've spent years waiting for you to make things right, and instead you've simply taken more. Victoria suddenly became inspired. Mother, what if we worked for you? We could manage your property, supervise your finances, become your assistants. Victoria, my dear, you want to suddenly work for me? I maintained a gentle tone as if explaining something to a young child. The same daughter who said my health issues weren't her responsibility wants to suddenly become my caregiver? The same son who blocked my number wants to help manage my finances? Christopher was making frantic phone calls, attempting to connect with anyone who might loan them money. I observed with the detached curiosity someone might feel watching a laboratory experiment. When he paused between unsuccessful attempts, I asked who he was calling. Anyone who might be willing to help us. Friends, extended relatives, professional contacts. Anyone really. And what exactly are you explaining to them? I inquired. He froze, understanding the trap. I'm explaining that we require financial assistance. Exactly like you required assistance with your medication. I suspect many of them will respond identically to how you responded to me. Michael had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke. Mom, Uncle Christopher, why don't you simply apologize? Genuinely apologize, not simply saying sorry because you were caught. Christopher paused his phone activity and looked at his nephew. I am genuinely sorry, Michael. We both are. Sorry for what specifically? I requested. I want to hear you articulate it clearly. We're sorry for not helping when you requested assistance, Christopher said slowly. And for accepting your money for years without repayment. And for communicating hurtfully about you when you weren't present. Getting progressively closer to understanding. What else? For attempting to have you legally deemed incompetent, so we could manage your finances. For having discussions about how beneficial it would be if you experienced a fatal health event. The words tumbled out rapidly, like removing a bandage from a wound. I nodded with approval. Now, was that genuinely difficult to communicate? Will you help us? Victoria asked hopefully. Help you discharge obligations you legitimately owe? Why would I help with that? I tilted my head. Victoria, when I requested assistance, what did you communicate to me? She winced. I told you to handle it independently. Precisely. So I'm providing you with equivalent instructions. Handle it independently. Michael was studying me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Grandmother, everything you've done was calculated and intentional, wasn't it? Orchestrated seems like such excessive terminology, but yes, I simply gave your mother and uncle the opportunity to demonstrate their authentic character. I smiled at my grandson. This young man who'd proved himself trustworthy when his relatives revealed their genuine selves through their actions. The following weeks unfolded precisely as I'd designed them. Christopher and Victoria exhausted their savings attempting to address their debt obligations. Their professional reputations suffered considerably as word spread about their attempts to have their wealthy mother declared incompetent. Neither secured additional employment easily, as the narrative that circulated focused on their attempted manipulation, rather than their actual qualifications. The debt I'd acquired from their creditors remained outstanding. Legal collection procedures progressed exactly as I'd promised. Christopher's motorcycle was repossessed when his payments ceased. Victoria's luxury automobile was reclaimed by the finance company. But Michael's future became luminous. His college expenses were fully covered. A generous living allowance ensured he could concentrate on his education without constant financial pressure. Investment accounts were established to support his future goals. By the time he graduated, doors that would have been closed became available. Years passed. Michael graduated with distinction, launched a thriving business, and eventually established his own family. He visited me regularly, called frequently, and never forgot the lesson his mother and uncle had learned so expensively. He remembered not just the material gifts, but the understanding that genuine family relationships transcend financial transactions. Christopher and Victoria's lives took different trajectories. Both eventually found employment in lower-paying positions. Both struggled with the reality of genuine financial constraint for the first time in their adult lives. And both spent decades contemplating the choices they'd made during that fateful month when their true character was revealed. My remaining years were peaceful. I spent my fortune on experiences I enjoyed, on investments in my community, and on my relationship with Michael. I never engaged with Christopher or Victoria again, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They'd revealed who they truly were when given the opportunity, and I'd simply responded appropriately to that revelation. The lottery win wasn't the most significant event of my life. The real transformation occurred when I finally understood that I couldn't purchase love or loyalty. Money could only reveal what already existed beneath the surface.